Welcome to today's podcast interview. I brought on Brent Cassity. Brent, welcome.
Thank you, Heather.
Brent and I have had a great pre-call. I'm excited to bring him on because we're going to be talking about metaphors and parallels, but the idea of the prisons of your mind as somebody who's been through prison, but I'm excited for you to share more about that. Before we dive into where you were, please give a little background. Where do you live and what do you do?
Okay, so I am in St. Louis, Missouri. Um, I am a speaker. I'm a podcast host. I'm an author of a book, Nightmare Success. My podcast is also Nightmare Success. Um, and I have a wife and three daughters. So I'm a girl dad.
Yeah.
And I just had I believe it or not, I'm a granddad. G-Paw and the twin boys that are 18 months old, which is just a whole lot of fun right now.
Oh, I
Loving it,
bet.
loving it. And I'm loving the whole thing. Went through three daughters that are, they'll be 31, 29, 26. And it's so different. I mean, so different, which I love because I loved having girls. So I'm getting the whole experience on the other side now.
That's fun.
Fun.
Here's what I want to ask you. So let's kind of start at you went through and I want to think about this as high level so it's relatable because I feel like we all have our version of rock bottom
Yeah.
challenges in life. But for you, like it ended up putting you in prison for 3 years. And so I'd love for you to share about, you know,
How
if
does that happen?
well, if you find yourself in rock bottom, how do
Yeah.
you rebuild? How do you not get stuck in that negative narrative where most people get stuck in that rut?
Yeah, so I think it's deep, isn't it? I mean, because I one of the topics that I always work around is what happens when your worst fear becomes your reality. That's what everybody fears. How do you deal with your worst fear becoming your reality? How do you adapt, survive, overcome, set yourself free? And I think that in my life, here's what I think is creepily odd. At 15 years old, Heather, at 15 years old, I was walking out of a prison visiting room with the man that I idolized being my dad that I had just visited. And when I say I idolized him, this guy was in my world at that time was unreal. He came from a really small town, won a state championship in basketball. He made the top five all state players. He went on to be a D1 athlete in college. He went on to law school and he graduated number one in his class, came out of there, won some big law cases, was on TV all the time. And then he got into business and became the golden touch kid. And at his early 30s, he gets in trouble with the bank that he owns and calls my brother and I in and says, "Boys, I got into a heap of trouble with the bank I own, and I'm gonna plead guilty to a federal crime." Heather, I was like shocked. I'm at that time loving life. I live in Southwest Missouri, this little Springfield town, and I'm 6'1" in eighth grade, which is like a 7-footer. I'm dominating sports. I can't wait to go to high school. And then my dad tells me that this world that I live in, which I thought was pretty normal at the time. You ride your bikes, you play in the neighborhood, everything is great. I've got great friends, great life with the school, sports, everything. And in one fell swoop, I'm being told that the guy that I idolize is going to go to prison. And while he's saying this, and I'm not really listening, I see his mouth moving, but it's just not making any sense. And by the time I start hearing his voice, and to get away from all of this, we're going to move to St. Louis. And I was like, this has to be the worst family meeting that I could ever have drawn up. Taking me out of the world that I love. My dad's going to go to prison. We're going to move somewhere where my dad's in prison and we're moving into a new area. So there was something that I learned early on in that time period, because I want to get back to this time when walk out of the prison room, is that when we moved into that neighborhood, we didn't have Google and stuff at that time. So you move in And people are really nice, they come and they give you cookies and, introduce themselves and whatever. But at that time, my mom's married. So the question is like, where's the guy? Where's the husband? Where's the father? And there's this huge black cloud over us. Like, what do we say? This is nobody teaches, you can't read a book for this. We can't really say, it doesn't feel comfortable to tell all these new people, or my dad's in prison or my husband's in prison. So we just said, he's out of town working, which Heather, it was true. He
Yeah.
was he was down 2 hours down the street, and he was working in the kitchen in a prison. But and we went to visit him every weekend. Going back to walking out of that prison room, one is when you go into a prison and you're visiting someone that you love, you're worried, are they okay? And once I saw Dad around the corner and saw that, he's in this prison uniform, which is really strange for me, I realized he was okay. But when I was walking out as that young teenager, I said, you know what? No matter what happens in my life, no matter what I do, this will never happen to me. I'll never find myself here. And the strange thing about that is 30 some odd years later, at the age of 47, I was walking back into that Marion prison visiting room to visit my dad, but I had just been in prison for 3 years. So, how in the world does something like that happen? How can it happen? When I told myself that was the one thing that wouldn't happen in my life. And I think it goes back to how you see things, your perception in the world, and then what you do when you have forks in the road and what path you take. That whole sliding doors moment of, if I would have gone this way left instead of this way right, what would have happened with my life? When I look at my dad and when he got out of prison, I was proud of him all over again. He's this young guy, he gets out of prison. There's one company that survives out of everything that he lost. And it's the most unsexy company that you could have. It's a prearranged funeral company. You actually take care of your funeral in advance, all your arrangements of who you're going to have as pallbearers, your music, and everything that goes along with it, and you pay for it and freeze the price so that your family doesn't have to take care of that at the time of your death, which is wonderful. It's a fantastic service.
Mm.
And he started growing this company and became something again. As I'm somebody who's now in high school going to college, and I'm thinking, it made me think, I believe in second chances. I believe that this can, what people get knocked down, they get back up. So it made an impact on me at an early age that my dad went to prison. He was on the top of the mountain and he's rebuilt this. So for me, looking at that, I was like, wow, then I can do. And my dad was always my biggest cheerleader, because in my time, I was going to be before I was not going to be a professional basketball player, which I didn't. I was 6'1" in eighth grade and never grew again. So that was not non-interesting to coaches when you get to the college level. But I loved the law, and I was a political science major and a theater minor. So I was going to be a trial attorney. The one thing that I had a really hard time with, this is like the first fork in my road. I wasn't brilliant. I graduated with a 3.4 grade point average. I wasn't a 4.0 student, but I did okay. But the one thing that I really had a hard time with, Heather, and never really was able to overcome, was that whole standardized test. For whatever reason, whatever, I registered on the dumb scale when it came to standardized tests. You give me an essay and I can write forever, but you give me a standardized test and I'm in funky land. So I couldn't get past the LSAT, and it was a really big deal for me because that was my plan. So I had spent my time in my college years of sales, and I had helped out with my dad's company and set appointments for salespeople and so on. And I also had sold these T-shirts in college that became like a huge, what it would be viral now, that we didn't know the word viral then, on campus. And so I started thinking, maybe I'd be good at sales. Maybe I'd be good at sales. I like directing. I got A's in directing, B's in acting. So I thought maybe sales works for me. So I went to my dad and I said, Dad, I'm thinking about maybe getting into sales. And since we have a sales company, what do you, oh, Brent, he said, you'd be awesome. You'd be, I, I just want you to do it because you'd love it. And I said, Dad, slow up. I said, I want to do this, but I said, you being the founder of the company, you being who you are, I said, is there anywhere I could just go where people just don't know who I am and I could just pass and fail and see if I'm any good at this? He said, yeah. He said, Brent, we just opened up Texas. You can move down there to Austin. We just opened up Harold Funeral Home. You can represent them, see if you're any good. I was like, wow, I'll take that. I was like, Heather, this is Austin, Texas at 22, 23 years old. Well, I went down there and I was good at it. I was really good at it. And when I got into it, it became something that in 10 months, had promoted myself to regional vice president and had this huge region. And my dad was like, I'm going to throw the keys to the kid. I don't like doing the sales, marketing and operations. And so at that time we had got into our second voyage was having an insurance company that funded these pre-need contracts. So dad loved that side of the business. I love this. And in a family business, Heather, it's kind of wild that you have, it's kind of like the Beatles or the Bee Gees or, the Eagles, who's the lead singer? Well, if you can find your voice in one or so it worked. And I got married, had kids. And like I told you when we were doing our talk before, at 40 years old, I thought we kind of hit the pinnacle. We even started another company called Forever Enterprises that when I said that NPS wasn't a sexy company, Forever Enterprises was a company that was revolutionizing the way people remembered a life through doing recordings and doing life stories of people before they died. And then it was on a touchscreen console at the cemetery so that you could introduce generations to each other. There's an old African proverb, when someone dies, the library burns. We were going to build a library of lives. So it became big. Wall Street Journal covered it, Time Magazine, all the big players. And then HBO came and did a documentary called The Young and the Dead. So at 40 years old, I've got 3 daughters. They're in private schools. They're wonderful. My wife and I have great friends and country club memberships and a house in Nantucket and everything's wonderful. And then that's the time when something can blindside you and hit you upside the head and your world takes a spiral spin. And mine happened at a gas station. I was getting gas and I got a call from the president of our insurance company saying, Brent, I just got off the call. And it was the weirdest phone call I've ever had, but it was a lady from the Ohio Investigative Insurance Department. And she said that she had information that could bring our company down. And Heather, it was like a cold shiver went through my spine because it was like I was that 15-year-old kid again, my dad telling me that he was going to plead to something. But this time, that feeling, I was in it also. And from that moment on, my life went into a nightmarish spin for 6 years that ended up with us, 6 of us pleading guilty, and all of us going to prison. And it was something that I think the only thing I can analogize it to is like if you're in a dark room and the floor falls out and you keep grabbing for the edges and the edges you can't keep getting closer to grabbing to and it just spreads out further until you just realize that all you can do is fall. And then you finally fall to the bottom and you hit your rock bottom. You got to figure out what to do.
So here's what I want to ask you, because not everybody may experience a drastic scenario as that quote rock bottom and going to prison.
Yeah.
But I feel many of us, whether it's bankruptcy, divorce, simply climbing that corporate ladder, realizing maybe you've been chasing the wrong thing all this time. So here's what I want to ask about that you touched on previously, like the importance of needing to adapt and survive and overcome to set yourself free. So how can we talk about those who are feeling in their own quote prisons that it's all
Yeah.
self-imposed?
Okay. So here's the thing, because I think we all do have built up prisons in our own mind. We can't help it really because you have experiences that you react to that come to you through your life. You know, you might have a bad childhood. You might have had a health crisis. You might have gotten into a bad relationship. You might have a bad job. You might have all these different things, but how do you get out of it and feel like that you're making the difference that you want to make? And I want to talk about, there's five rules, five tools that I used in prison. And I think that they can be really used really well for life. Here's the first one. When you are in a situation and you're stuck, one of the best things to do is humble yourself and ask for advice. Just reach out. It's look around. When I was in prison, I was looking around because I was in an environment that I never thought I would be in. I started looking around. I thought, who's getting this right around here? Who's doing their time the way that I would want to do my time? That guy's over there. He's reading the books that I'd like to read. That guy is over there. He's doing a prison job that I would like to have so I could eat up my time. That guy over there is doing a workout that I need to do so I can get in the best shape of my life. And then you go up and you start talking to these people. And it's incredible how people who are getting it right want to share it because they feel good about the fact that they're getting it right. And they're very much more than you think open to sharing. And I compare it to, it's like getting the answers to the test before the test. If you could just humble yourself and go to someone, I used to do this when I was a young kid, in my young 20s, when I was trying to grow a company. I'd read something about somebody and I just call them. And hey, I was reading this article about you and it's talking about this and that you did this and how'd you do that? And all of a sudden, I could take what that person was giving me, I could implement it. So Heather, that's the first thing. It's sometimes really hard to, it's easier said than done to say, humble yourself and ask for advice because you really do have to say, hey, I don't know everything. I'm not going to know everything, but I like what that person's doing. If I could just make that connection, maybe I can feed off of that and that could become part of what I am. Yeah. So that's a big one, to humble yourself, ask for advice, start implementing those things that you think could work in yours. This is something you and I talked about, Heather, before we got on. I was always afraid when I was in prison that I would become prison Brent instead of Brent, because there's so many ways to fall into being institutionalized. And watching Shawshank Redemption now, after I've been to prison, that movie has so many things in it about life. I mean, there's so many things that are said. Like Red, he talks to Andy about the prison walls, and he says, when you first get here, these walls you look at, they are looked on to keep you in. And then he said, the longer you're here, these walls you look at are as comfort, put their arms around you. And you start looking and seeing that's how people get institutionalized in bad things. I think when you are stuck, really stuck, Andy Dufresne stuck. Andy Dufresne, if you haven't seen Shawshank Redemption, he was a man who was put in prison. He was innocent for killing his wife. And he finally escapes prison after 19 years. He has what I call finding your Zihuatanejo. Andy's Zihuatanejo is the bluest of blue waters, the whitest of white sands, fixing up the old fishing boat, taking his friends out fishing, and then fixing up the little place on the beach so that they can watch the sun go down on the porch. Andy chips away at his cell every night for 19 years. Every day he gives himself a victory and he lets out that wall, the pieces of the wall that he chipped, in holes in his pocket, so it just feeds out into the yard. But it's constant. It's constant that he stays on his passion of what his passion is, and that's his Zihuatanejo. He's getting to it. So when I think of somebody who's stuck, we do this as kids. Like we ask a kid, like, "Hey, what do you want to be? What do you want to be when you grow up?" When do we stop asking people that? I don't know. It's like high school, college, I don't know. At some point, we just don't, it's no fun anymore to talk about what you want to be when you grow up. But finding your passion will allow you to get up. It will allow you to get the motivation that you need to stay on discipline. And it's actually digging deep into who you are is what is that driving force. You really, and a lot of people like do just a little smidgen of that, like when the year goes from 23 to 24, they're going to do a New Year's resolution and then they stay on it for 2 weeks, and 86% of the people fall off their New Year's resolutions. But there's a reason why, is they really didn't really have a passion for it to keep them on it. If they did, they would have stayed with it. The third thing is win the day one day at a time. Unfair things happen. Move on and make a difference regardless. Because a lot of times what happens is that unfair things can happen, so that gets us stuck. I can't believe this happened to me. I feel so bad. I feel so victimized. And there's such a big difference between being a victim and being a survivor. Being a victim takes away all your strength and all your ability to fight, because you're pointing fingers, you're blaming, you're basically curling up in a fetal position. When you say you're a survivor, you feel different. I mean, when I say I'm a survivor, I'll give you a quick example, Heather. When I hit rock bottom in my life, I was, and I'm the glass half full guy. The night before I was going to plead guilty, I had not dealt, because I dealt with this thing for 6 years of getting up fighting, going to bed fighting, getting up fighting, going to bed fighting. And then when it was finally the time that I was going to plead guilty, I hadn't dealt with the fact that, what am I going to do? I'm going to go to prison. I hadn't even dealt with it. I'm going to be an ex-felon. My kids are going to have a dad that's an ex-felon. My wife's going to be living with an ex-felon. She's going to be living with a felon, going to prison. How does this work? How should this work? Or should this work? Should I just exit stage left and be done with this? And the Brent Cassity that I don't recognize was drinking that night alone, because my family was up at our vacation house and I was going to go the next day because I didn't want him to be at this hearing. And I started feeling really bad for myself. And I started feeling like a victim. And it was the first time that I had dealt with the fact that, can I survive this? Am I strong enough? And I got out a piece of paper. I started writing all the people who've been supportive. I had all these great supporters and friends. I started giving my wife all this great advice. You deserve, after being such a hero and a warrior through this, you deserve better. I gave my daughters all the fatherly advice of what you need to do the next step of your life. And I finished that. I signed it. I grabbed another drink and I went down, turned on the car in the garage. And I didn't know if I was going to go hit a tree or if I was going to let the car run. And at that moment, it was like, Heather, something struck me like a lightning bolt. It's like, oh my God, Brent, what are you doing? You're the glass half full guy. Your daughters would absolutely be appalled you behaving this way. This would be the worst way, the worst legacy that you could ever leave for yourself. And it was at that moment, that truly rock bottom moment, that I realized that there was such a difference between being a victim and a survivor. And I was sitting there in that car that night. Thank God I didn't pass out. And I was thinking, I'm a survivor. I'm going to survive this. And I had so many ugly things coming next to me. I don't know what prison I'm going to. I don't know how long I'm going to go to prison, but no matter what happens, I will survive. And I'm going to make my family proud of how I handle it. When I talk about win the day, one day at a time, that's what you have to do in prison, but it's really what you have to do in life. You can't look at, I'm going to be sentenced to 5 years. You can't swallow that. But you also can't do that in real life when you're out. How I'm going to do something in 5 years. What can you do today? What can you do today? So my daughter made me a calendar every year. And it had family pictures on it. And this was while I was in prison. And my routine that night would be to write in the box my win for the day. And I'm not being unrealistic, because I would have bad days. So if I had a bad day, I let myself have a horrible, no good, very bad day. It'd go down to my toes. And I'd write that in the box. But one thing I wouldn't allow to happen is to have 2 boxes of bad, because I was scared to death of becoming prison Brent. And I knew if 2 days became a week became a month, and a year I would become institutionalized. So when I wrote a bad day in a box, I fought to find a win for the next day. That next box was going to be a win, regardless of how I could get to it. And you say, well, Brent, how could you have win in prison? there's all kinds of ways to have wins in prison. You could have a really great conversation with your wife or your daughters on the phone about something, or you might have gotten forklift certified at the food warehouse, or you might have done one more push-up or whatever the hell it was. It's your win. And you can only do what you can do today anyway, right?
Yeah.
You can't do anything about yesterday. And tomorrow is a hope. So win the day one day at a time, and don't put two boxes of bad. And the thing about that is you can have a bad day. Just don't be unrealistic about it. Just don't fall into multiple bad days. Just find the win for the next day.
Mm.
The fourth thing, Heather, was like, I think is really big for me is learn from your mistakes. They don't define you, they make you wiser. What you do with a mistake, especially when you're stuck, will make you a winner or a loser. How you handle that. Mistakes are fine to make. In fact, they're needed to make. In fact, the people who make the biggest difference in our world have made all the mistakes. They write the books about it. And I think our society right now is so afraid of making mistakes that they think I've got to be perfect because they're living their life watching everybody's best highlight reel to their personal life that's not on a highlight reel on these Instagram stories and everything. And that's where we get stuck. Like they're so good. You don't know anything about them. You don't know anything about what's going on. But just don't make the same mistake twice. That's the one thing. Jack Nicklaus says you can make a bad shot on a hole, just don't make two of them. It really messes up the hole. And the last one, when you're stuck, don't give in. Don't give up. Keep being yourself regardless of the circumstances. Otherwise, you will lose what makes you you. That's the one that really scared the hell out of me in prison because I thought, and I was scared. I think my wife and kids even looked at me like, is Dad okay? You know, when they come visit, like, he still seems like Dad. Okay, good. Because I think they were also worried about me turning into prison Brent. And I was worried about turning prison Brent. But the most important thing is not to get institutionalized in your mind so much that you can't recognize your ugly routine cannot be the warden to your freedom. I guess that's the one thing that you can say. You can get into these ugly routines and you get so comfortable with those that you can't stretch to your one thing that you want because it looks too unfamiliar to you. The unknown, and the reason I use the term nightmare success in all my stuff is that people say, well, those two words don't go together, Brent. If you look at everything that we do, they're always together. To get to where you want to go, to any books that you read of anybody that's gone there, they have to step into their unknown to get to that place because it is unknown. It is scary. It is fearful. It is nervous. It makes your stomach kind of feel weird. But if you can step into it, you're like, oh, well, that wasn't as bad as I thought it'd be. And then you take another step and you're like, oh. And then your third step is like, well, hell, I'm on this now. I can do this. I've got the role. So as for those people who are stuck, those are things that I know that they're not sophisticated, but they're real to put those things into work for yourself. And if you put those into work, one way or the other, you know, there's the old Chinese proverb, you get knocked down 7 times, you get up 8. Why do you get up 8? The only reason you get up 8 is because you got a reason to get up. And putting these things into play, you always have a reason to stay in play because everybody gets stuck. There's not, if you're talking to somebody that says that they never get stuck, run from them because they're not telling you the truth.
Here's what I love about you sharing your story and those 5 simple steps. And I think truly change is simple and not necessarily easy at
It's
first.
hard.
But what's bringing to mind is Napoleon Hill wrote a book. Obviously, people may know Think and Grow Rich, but his other book, less popular or less mainstream, Outwitting the Devil. And that book, Outwitting the Devil, the quote, devil is simply an undisciplined mind. And
Yeah.
I feel like what you shared via the power of resilience and persistence and that, you know, what I hear a lot of people is like that negative mental chatter takes control of many people, but we have the will to decide not today.
Yeah. And there was somebody that gave Heather a analogy of you've got crazies going on in your mind. That's fine. But don't let the crazies ride in the front seat and change the stations on the radio. You can put the crazies in the back seat and you control the radio.
Yeah.
And I think there's something to that. There's nothing that will ever completely eliminate the crazies in our mind and the negatives in our mind. It's just that it doesn't have to be the front of our mind. It can be the thing that's back there. It creeps up. But if you have some things to use with it, um, and I think it's really important to stay focused on what is your why. What are you trying to do? I'm not talking about business. I'm just talking about in your life. What are you trying to do? What makes you feel good? And if you can find that, then who are the people that are doing those type of things so that you can become part of there's the laws of attraction. There's all kinds of different ways that you can look at all this. But
Yeah.
being around people that make you feel good because you're trying to get there is also another way to get yourself unstuck.
100%. And what you're talking about there is our environment. There's a book we all, or people have heard the saying, you are the average of the five people you spend the most time with. So if
Yes.
you're hanging out with a bunch of miserable, broke people, that will be your reality. If you're hanging
Yeah.
out with, active lifestyle entrepreneurs, thinking big, million, multi-million, you can
Yeah.
step into that reality.
Yeah.
So what I
Well,
want to,
one other thing though, Heather, speaking about environment, because I think whether you're talking about prison or you're talking about a place you don't want to be in your mind,
yeah,
there was a guy, his name was Damon West, and he had an interesting story. And I think he actually wrote a book that was called The Coffee Bean, but it was, he was a quarterback in Texas, got into drugs, got into prison. He got a big prison sentence. And he was having a really hard time with prison. He just wasn't adjusting. He was getting beaten up. He was ended up in solitary confinement. And this old guy came to him, been in prison for a long time. He said, Damon, you're not doing good. And he said, I don't know if you're going to make it in here. And he said, can I give you some advice? And he said, sure. He said, well, you got to think of this prison yard as a boiling pot of water. He said, are you following me? He said, I'm following you. He said, if I put a carrot in that boiling pot of water, he said, what's it do to the carrot? And he said, well, it makes the carrot soft. He said, you can't get soft in here. He said, because you'll get hurt. He said, you got to stay strong. So the carrot gets soft. And he said, you can't get soft in here. You got to stay strong. So he said, what if I put the egg in there? What happens to what's the water do to the egg? He said, well, it makes the egg hard. He said, okay. He said, you can't get hard in here. You got to still have empathy. You still got to have a heart and want to lose yourself. He said, are you following me? He said, I think I'm following you. He said, if I put a coffee bean in that water, he said, what's it do to the water? He said, I'm not sure what you mean. He said, what happens to the water? He said, tell me. He said, the coffee bean changes the water to coffee. The water doesn't change the coffee bean. So he
wow.
said, what you have to be in here, you have to be the coffee bean. You have to be the change.
Yeah.
And if you think of that on a daily basis, instead of you being the carrot or instead of you being the egg, because the water's affecting you, if you affect the water and you are the change, then that's a different mindset, totally different mindset. And Damon West said it changed his whole way of how he approached his prison sentence. And now he's a big time speaker and
Yeah.
very
Well,
successful and writes his own books.
and I love that coffee bean analogy. What I wrote down, I've heard it said a little bit differently, is you have to learn to influence the environment, not be influenced by your environment.
Yep.
Oh my
Yeah,
goodness, it's powerful.
it is powerful. It's a great analogy. I wish I would have thought of it, but it's a good one.
There's another thing I want to ask you. We'll see if you remember what you shared with me, but I always ask, if you could give humanity a billboard message, what do you want people to know? And you shared that nothing is as bad as your mind makes it out. So
Yeah.
can we emphasize that? Because it is easy when you fall into challenges or obstacles and the woe is me mentality, we make a mountain out of a molehill.
Oh yeah, my wife Julie, she's like an expert at it. She can make something like so big, so bad, and then then I think there's two ways to go you know, the craziness that happens. But when I said nothing is as bad as your mind makes it out to be, um, my experience of that was once I was dealing with the fact that my life was going to be so different that the night that I looked that I was going to prison, my wife and I drove up and we could see the it was like dusk. So you could see the guys walking the fence and you could see the lights going on in the prison. And all I could think of, and I didn't share this with Julie, was, gosh, that's going to be me tomorrow night. I'm going to be in there. And it's not like I'm going to be at some church camp for a week. I'm sentenced to 5 years. That is going to be my life for years. It was just such a big thing to think of. And my mind was so muddled with all the bad, so bad. And I think I told you, Heather, when I was standing at the gates of Leavenworth to be taken in and processed, I thought, I'm going to get beaten up and then raped and then stabbed, or I might get stabbed first and then raped. And I didn't know what order was coming, but I was preparing myself for this unknown. And I do also remember that I was thinking everything I love, everything I know is behind me. Everything that is my unknown that I'm walking into scares me to death. But, and we talked about this earlier, it wasn't as bad as I thought it was going to be. My world that I walked into, my unknown world, I found out that there were people on that side that wanted to help me. I found out that there were people that I could relate to and talk to. And then I also ended up helping them. And it was one of the biggest things that in my mind that changed me forever is that my perception of people going or that we're in prison were the worst people in the world. And my perception coming out is I now have a podcast where that's all I interview is people that have been justice impacted because I want to hear their stories. I want to hear how they got there. I want to hear how their world and how it changed and what they're doing with their second chances because I was forever changed with hearing people's lives and how they are, who they are. But my biggest thing is that I made it out to be such a huge mountain, like you said, Heather, and it was a molehill. Yes, was it a dramatic change in my life? Absolutely. I went from having everything, the pinnacle, to being a plastic chair, a locker, and a bunk bed. But I also realized I can do that too, which gives you a lot of whatever that is when you get out. You have an urgency to want to enjoy the moment. There are times now that I can say, and I hope I never lose this, when I'm on a family trip or I'm with the grandkids or with my daughters and my wife, and I'm sitting there thinking, thank God I'm here. Thank God I'm not missing this moment. And because there were moments I missed, I missed Christmases and Thanksgivings and my daughter winning the state championship in tennis and all these things that happened while I was in. My daughter graduated from college. I mean, there were all these things. And each time that happened, I was like, I can't believe I'm not there. But now that I'm out, I'm hoping that I don't lose that special feeling of being in the moment because it's important for all of us to be in the moment. There's how many times, Heather, do we see somebody in the moment, one of the great moments, and they're putting their phone up to try to record the moment instead of just being in the moment? Yeah. I don't know what they're going to do with that moment that they're recording, but they're missing the feeling of the moment that they're recording. And I hope everybody takes a step back. What do you have that you're grateful for? And are you appreciating that? Because if you're not, you're going to be the 85-year-old rocking in the rocking chair thinking there's a lot of time and a lot of things that went past me and I was standing on the sideline instead of being in the game. And that's not where you want to be. And that, to me, that's part of finding your Zewataneo is what are you grateful for? What do you feel? How do you feel? What moments make you feel?
Well, and thank you for emphasizing the importance of presence and gratitude because so many people are living at Mach 90, been there, done that. And I've really slowed down. I enjoy me time. I enjoy quiet. I'm a nature girl anyway, but man, the presence.
Yeah.
Yes. Here's what I want to ask you because we touched on a lot and I want to bring this full circle. What do you believe is a key takeaway you want listeners to get, whether it's mental resilience or second chances, or what do you want to emphasize?
Well, I want to say that second chances are a big deal because that's something I work with every day. And I think that in life, you can always get back up. You don't have to stay down. Everybody, I believe everybody has something in them that can make a difference. I really do. I've talked to so many different people, and I think everybody has something to give that is unique about them that can make a difference in this crazy world that we live in. So I don't want anybody ever to think it's over. When I was talking about my own life, hitting your rock bottom is one or two things in your fork in your road. It's either the end or it's a new beginning. And I think that if you look at it as a new beginning, to relearn what makes you feel the way you do so that you can go after those things,
Yeah.
you can do that and continue to step and make your world what you want it to be.
Yeah. And truly, I believe that every moment could be a fresh start, especially every day. But
Every day is, yeah.
yes, here's what I want to ask you to wrap up the interview. I have a few rapid fire questions for you.
Okay.
What is a quote or motto that you live by?
Um, whether you think you can or whether you think you can't, you are correct. You are right. That's Henry Ford. I think that is such a mindset
Yeah.
that, and I think it's overused and maybe cliche, but it means so much to me because where you are in life, whether you think you can or whether you think you can't, you are right.
Yeah.
And that's where we are every day, Heather.
Yeah.
Every day when we get up, what do we think? We think we can, we think we can't. Well, no matter what, our mind is, it will be turned on or off by what we think. It believes what you tell it.
For sure. What is a book you're currently reading or highly recommend?
Oh gosh. I'll tell you one of the crazy books that I mean you mentioned Napoleon Hill, which is obviously that a lot of people read that, but believe it or not, one of the books that I had that was like a game changer for me, and it was a guy that had a dealership and it was called Customers for Life, but it was all about mind and service and customer service and how you grow. And it was about mindset and changing, thinking outside of the box. And and maybe it was because of the time period of when I read that, but it's one of those books that I underlined and I went back to over and over again as I got into, we got into bigger in business, but it's not one of those famous books. And the other one that I'm reading right now is Sam Patton's book, and it is Tales of Dangerous Tales of a Foreign Agent. And he was the guy that was wrapped up in every big thing that happened in the last 30 years in the foreign diplomacy was Sam Patton was involved in, and he ended up going into prison under the Russiagate, and he was one of the few people that went to prison. But he came out and he wrote an incredibly interesting book, and his grandmother was like the dame of Washington D.C. socialites, and he's got a lot of interesting stories in there. But I love it's like a thriller, and it's politics, and it's got also some good takeaways, just life takeaways. So he was a guest on the show, and he's a fascinating guy. So if you want to check out a good book, it's Sam Patton's the author.
Fair enough. All right, final question. What advice would you give your younger self?
Oh man, slow down. Um, trust but verify. Because trust can be a wonderful thing or it can be a knife. And I think in my early years, I probably trusted too much and should have taken and become more responsible for what I was supposed to be responsible for. And I think that's what led me to where I was. arrogantly thought that other people could take care of what I was supposed to take care of. And looking back on it, I should have been a lot more responsible with the positions that I held.
But you wouldn't have that lesson today had you not gone through that.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Very
Brent,
true.
thank you so much for joining me and sharing your story.
I enjoyed it, Heather. I appreciate you having me on as a guest.